So essentially, this webinar is designed to open the introduction, open a discussion on project sustainability. So as Bente was saying, this deals with once the project sort of lifetime, which we define as when the Commission, European Commission, or other funding source has been providing funding, has been overseeing the project. Once that period is over, and there's still the desire, the requirement to continue the project. Basically, what then? How do you deal with this? So that's what we'll be talking about. I think especially in European Commission projects, there's been definitely, we're seeing more interest from the part of the European Commission to ensure project sustainability. So I think this is kind of an interesting topic to discuss for a lot of people who are managing or participating to these projects. So essentially, what is sustainability? In a word, sustainability is the process of maintaining change in a balanced fashion. So this is a little bit of an oxymoron, but essentially it's about thinking beyond the lifetime of the project. So what happens to the project once that initial funding period is over? And it requires a bit of not mental gymnastics, but a bit of creative thinking, just to think of what are the assets of the project, and how can these assets or developments continue on into the future. And the reason why this is a wheel is because this process is essentially a continuous repeating cycle, which needs to be repeated throughout the lifetime of the project, and not a one-time or one-off effort, which is sort of tacked on at the end. So I like to think of it sort of as baking an apple pie. When you want to make an apple pie, you don't just make a plain pie and then when it comes out of the oven, put an apple on top, right? You need to sort of bake in the apples into the pie from the beginning. And so sustainability needs to be sort of an integral part of the project from the outset. And so another aspect is there may be a partner which is tasked with responsibility for project sustainability. But again, this isn't the right way of thinking about it. So project sustainability needs to be baked in. It needs to be a shared responsibility amongst all the partners throughout the lifetime of the project. So you basically, the key takeaway of this slide is that project sustainability can't be outsourced. It can't be given to one person to sort of ensure that it gets done. It's something which needs to be thought about from the beginning and which all participants to the project need to take an active part in ensuring the project as a whole achieves sustainability. So very quickly, how do you achieve sustainability? Very quickly, it's in the simplest form, it's about meeting the needs of the end users. So it's been essentially it exists in the vector between the users and your project. So of course, I mean, it seems simple, but it's kind of a complex topic because users or the people who benefit from the output of your project are not a homogeneous monolithic entity. So users might be fragmented in different communities. They might have different sophistication level, different needs. So it's a kind of a complex issue, but the first step is realizing that in order for a project to be sustainable, it needs to provide value to a subset or a group or a community of users. So the first step is to think, who can benefit from the achievements of my project? Is it an academic community? Is it government policymakers? Is it the private sector, businesses? And so once you ask yourself these questions and you know who can derive value from the project, then you can begin to identify who the users are and tailor your project in such a way that you're maximizing the value generated for those users. Then we move on to the next step, and there's different ways of achieving this. You can do just a survey. So once you know who the end users are, you can reach out to them and ask them, what are their needs, what are their expectations, what are the pain points that your project can meet. So one way of achieving this is via, for example, a survey, amongst others. We move to the next sort of layer, and this is essentially implementing best practices into your project. So meeting end user requirements is a necessary principle, but it's not a sufficient one. In and of itself, that's not enough to ensure sustainability. You also need to ensure that your project is implementing industry recognized best practices. So this means you're making sure the project provides value, but you're doing so in, for example, a user-friendly way. or that the data you provide is accessible, easily accessible. So one way to achieve this is to look around for comparable projects or look at other initiatives in your field and basically learn what lessons have they learned, what challenges have they faced and overcome, and essentially learn these lessons and apply these best practices to your project. So you're building upon and improving on the efforts of others. And then finally, the final layer is to apply everything you've learned. So what are the user requirements you're meeting? What are the industry best practices? And then apply these to your specific project to operationalize these general practices into specific, concrete, actionable elements in your project. So this is quite vague, of course, but we'll try to make this a little bit more concrete. So in our project, which is called NextGEOSS, we are working to develop a new online platform for Earth observation data. So we're building, we take data from satellites, we process the data, and then we serve this data to end user communities. And so in order to identify or study how we could deliver the most value to our specific end users, we conducted a survey of potential users of this Earth observation platform. And we asked them a series of questions to determine what they considered the most important needs or what their requirements were, which you see here on the left. So these are what our respondents, our users said, this is what their needs are. This is what they need to be met. And then we also asked them what their current pain points were, what the challenges that they faced with other platforms that exist on the market or that they use, which is on the right. So here we have what they struggle with, what the issues are, what the current supply of solutions isn't able to provide the challenges. And then what we did is we did a study where we sort of mixed the two, we analyzed the two. And the goal of our project is to maximize, to focus on this top tier and to maximize end user value by focusing at the same time in the most important service features, what they want to see, as well as solving the main challenges which they face today with the current solutions offered. So we move on to the next point, which is thinking about sustainability. So I think one of the major misconceptions is that the only way for a project to ensure sustainability is for the entire project as a whole to remain exactly as it is. So that your project needs to transition from receiving a grant or European Commission or government funding to a fully viable commercial funding model. And that's not really necessarily the case. So I think project sustainability should be thought about as sustainabilities instead. So a project has many different moving parts, is made up of different constitutive elements, different parts, moving pieces which work together. And these elements can be tangible. So, a new product, a new service, a new technology, which was developed throughout the course of your project. But you should sort of move a step further and think about potential intangible elements of your project. So for example, your project may have been able to create a network around it. It may have been able to build a community of users who were previously fragmented but are now linked. And this community, this network effect, can be valuable and can serve a function. So this is sort of an idea of an intangible asset of your project, which could potentially, that specific part could be sustainable, even if the rest of the project maybe isn't. Another example of this is sort of a lighthouse effect. So your project can sort of act to attract users or to serve a guiding function. So in essence, it's important to sort of think creatively when you think about project sustainability. And the ideal is that the entire project is preserved in its current state. This isn't always possible or feasible. And such, it's useful to break down the project into its different elements and consider each one in turn and think about, can a specific process developed in the project be preserved? Can a specific conclusion or technique or mechanism be used, reused, and essentially find a new home somewhere else? So to conclude, this is my last slide. I've written here a few sort of initial high-level takeaways. So it's difficult to generalize for all projects, which is why every project needs to sort of go through this exercise by itself. But I think at a minimum, these three basic concepts apply to many, if not the majority, of research projects, and this may sort of help guide your thinking. So the central question you should be asking yourself is, what problem is my project trying to solve for my users, right? And so these different aspects need to be thought about. Who are the users? What are their needs? What are their problems? How do I solve those problems? And this question needs to be asked over and over again at every stage of the project, and not only by one or two partners, but by all partners. So this question needs to be thought about, dissected, analyzed, and answered multiple times at different stages. And a big challenge is that the real value of your project to users needs to be demonstrated and proven. So who are the stakeholders of the product or the findings or the service or whatever project output, and how does this give them value? So then the next step is you can think about a niche. So a niche market should be identified, should be exploited. And then finally, the end users, whether it's community, whether it's a government, community, or academic, or industry, needs to be identified and actively marketed to, right? And this is a lot of, maybe universities or research groups have difficulty marketing. This marketing can come in many forms. There needs to be essentially a sort of a two-way engagement, a user engagement, which is continuous and not one-off. So a question you should ask yourself is, how much user feedback have I sought? How much have I listened to? And crucially, how much of this user feedback have I incorporated into my project and in my project development process? So have conversations with potential users changed what you do? And have your original plans evolved over time? This is how you know that your user engagement has been effective. If your initial proposal, the final product, may be different from the initial proposal because you've sought user reactions and feedback and you've implemented them in your project. So that's all I have on my side.